I've got Jaxson Dart right now as quarterback 2 going into the 2025 NFL draft. Jaxson Dart's going to be 22 in May. He's 6'2", 225, built very similar to Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders as well. He had 4 or more touchdowns in 4 games this past season. So 19 of his 29 touchdowns came in 4 games. 6 touchdowns against Arkansas, 5 touchdowns against Furman, 4 touchdowns against Duke, 4 touchdowns against Georgia Southern. And that is very inferior competition. But at the end of the day, I just look at Jaxson Dart's skill set. And there are things that I feel that he does do better than Shedeur Sanders. He has an incredible ability to be able to make tight window throws. And there's just more tight window throws on Jaxson Dart's tape than there are on Shedeur Sanders' tape. I thought that he excelled in the quick game just as well as a guy like Cam Ward does. When you see the way that these quarterbacks get the ball out of their hands fast when attacking the quick game, I thought that Jaxson Dart did a really good job of doing that. They ran a ton of RPO over there at Ole Miss this past season, which I think makes it a little bit difficult to evaluate Jaxson Dart. But I just look at the intangibles that he has, the throwing mechanics, the motion in his throwing, the way that he can run the ball. Super physical when he takes off as a runner. And I question if that was going to translate as well to the NFL. And I do think that he'll run a little bit less in the NFL. But nonetheless, it reminds me of Jalen Hurts, where when you need your quarterback to go out there and get those extra yards on those critical third downs, I think that Jaxson Dart is going to be able to do that in the league. He has an ideal throwing motion. He's got better arm talent than Shedeur Sanders, but not by a lot. I just think that it's a tad bit better. He's not up there with a guy like Cam Ward when we're talking about, a guy that's knocking on the door of elite arm talent. I don't think that Jaxson Dart is there, but I do think that he's closer to that than a guy like Shedeur Sanders is. He played with less talent at the wide receiver position than Shedeur Sanders did as well. When you look at the wide receivers that lined up for him at Ole Miss, which was a front run by Trey Harris, who was absolutely a dog, and I think will be drafted at the top of the second round. The ball just comes out of his hands much faster on the shorter concepts as well. When we're talking bubble screens and quick slants and even the backside digs, which there's not a lot of that on his tape when we're talking about the backside digs, but just the way that he can catch the ball and not have to plant his feet to get the ball out on a bubble screen or on a quick slant. Those kind of things that give you a little bit more, or give the wide receiver a little bit more time to get the ball in his hands and be able to make a move and get the necessary yak after. I think that Jaxson Dart possesses a better skill than Shedeur Sanders and the other guys beneath him. He has the ability to see it late and squeeze the ball into a tight window, where I feel like for Shedeur Sanders, he has to win with anticipation because he does lack that arm strength that I think is going to be an issue in the NFL. Jaxson Dart played in the SEC. That's another thing as well. He doesn't take unnecessary sacks. I know that the Senior Bowl made it kind of look like that, but at the end of the day, his left tackle at the Senior Bowl was completely getting blown up. Jaxson Dart had 8 games where he was sacked 1 time or less in those games. So he is a guy that knows how to get the ball out of his hands fast, assess what the defense is doing, assess what is happening up front without taking his eyes off what is happening down the field. Jaxson Dart has a few more tools, I think, that will cater to him better when he gets to the NFL, especially if he's going to be in a problematic situation in the NFL. I think that if you put Shedeur Sanders right now and you put Jaxson Dart in a problematic situation, which most of the teams that are picking in the top 5 of this NFL draft are teams that are going to have a problematic situation. When you look at the Tennessee Titans, when you look at the Cleveland Browns, who are probably a better situation of the top 3, when you add in the New York Giants, I think that Jaxson Dart has a skill set and tools in his bag that are going to translate to the NFL a little bit better than what Shedeur Sanders has right now. But I will say this, Jaxson Dart and Shedeur Sanders are very similar, very close prospects. I just think I got to give the small nod to Jaxson Dart, and I'm going to stay here until we get to draft night. I think that my assessment and my evaluation on the quarterbacks coming out in 2025 has pretty much come to an end here. And this will be my final hierarchy and rankings going into the draft. I think that the mobility from Jaxson Dart puts him over the top for me. I think that the velocity from Jaxson Dart puts him over the top for me. And for the Giants, the ability to possibly get Jaxson Dart in the second round, where we all know that Shedeur Sanders is, I don't even want to say likely. I want to say that it's all but a done deal that Shedeur Sanders is going to be a quarterback that is drafted in the first round. Whereas when we speak on Jaxson Dart, that is not solidified just yet. I think that there's a chance that Jaxson Dart goes in the back half of the first round, but more than likely, I look at Jaxson Dart, and from what I've seen with the rumblings or the rumors that have been going around the NFL, it's likely that Jaxson Dart is going to be drafted in the second round. Now, if you do go out there and draft a guy like Jaxson Dart in the second round, then you're able to save draft capital. You also don't have to trade up and go get a guy like Cam Ward, which I'm not opposed to. I am for that. If they go out there and they do that, I'm okay with that. A team could possibly draft Jaxson Dart in the first round, and that could mess up some of your plans for trying to grab a guy like Jaxson Dart in the second round. Reminds me of the plan that a lot of New York Giants had for Michael Penix Jr. coming out in the 2024 draft class as well. But for me, I think that this places more emphasis on why it is extremely important for the New York Giants to address quarterback in free agency, so that they can go into the draft with some sort of plan and have some sort of an insurance policy to back up if they cannot get the guy that they deem to be quarterback one. Now, I believe it was Jordan Renan that I heard come out and say that the New York Giants have Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward closer than the rest of the NFL community views them. For me, I think that there is a pretty significant gap there. And for me, if Jaxson Dart is there at pick 34, it helps you out in a couple of cases. I do prefer that over Shedeur Sanders at 3 right now, because if you're able to go out here and draft an elite prospect like an Abdul Carter, like a Travis Hunter, like a Mason Graham, or even possibly trade back. Imagine if you could trade with the team that wants to come up and get that 3rd overall pick, trade back a little bit, possibly leave the first round with a guy like Kenneth Grant, or possibly, just one of these defensive tackles that are at the top of the draft here. To me, that yields better, and leaving the draft with a guy like Jaxson Dart in the second round, and also having that elite talent in possibly the top 10. You all know that when I first came up here and started talking about the New York Giants draft position this year, one of my plans at the beginning of the process was maybe to trade back from 3, stay within the top 10, top 15, and try to bring in a guy like Tetairoa McMillan to pair with Malik Neighbors. But with the defensive talent that we have in this draft from a defensive tackle position, there are just so many players that you could pair next to Dexter Lawrence. Derek Harmon being a guy out of Oregon that I think could be that ideal candidate, but would possibly be a guy that could be going later in the first round. But I think you have more options if you are able to draft a guy like Jaxson Dart in the second round over drafting a guy like Shedeur Sanders, at pick number 3 overall.